He warned that if the barbarians were to come under the Northern Yuan's command, it would lead to a massive uprising. He continued, saying that even the Ming general would find it challenging to quell the high-spirited Northern Yuan. The man explained that the reason for sharing this information was because he wanted them to engage in battle with the Northern Yuan for his protection, asking them to understand that he must lead his kin just as the king of Joseon governs the country. The man with the beard declared that it was settled, stating they would discuss the details later, and ordered him to go back and feign compliance with the Northern Yuan's compulsion. Then he requested Crown Prince, Grand Prince Suyang, and Frontier Affairs Minister Kim Jong-seo to enter. The man in the red robes stated that if the Northern Yuan had involved the barbarians, it wouldn't be an easy war to end, questioning if it meant they'd figured out a way to defeat Ming. He continued, saying that while it might not be a sweeping victory, they must have prepared to deal a serious blow, perhaps even devising a method to counter the infantry hand cannons, and that they may also be planning to raid during a rainstorm, but relying on the weather was not a wise action for a general. He declared that since early times, a strong army had been an unchanging element to prevent all disturbances. The man in the red robes then addressed Grand Prince Suyang, ordering him to prioritize training the twin frontier armored soldiers, and then ordered the Frontier Affairs Minister Kim Jong-seo to come forward. The man in the red robes ordered the ordinary soldiers participating in the expedition to head towards Shenyang. The army traversed the harsh desert landscape. The man on horseback addressed the assembled soldiers, telling them to listen up, and that they all must have gathered there bearing a grudge against the Ming dynasty. He continued, declaring that he, too, wanted to tear the Ming emperor to death. He reminded them of how much the Ming had persecuted them, and that they had forgotten their ancestors' feats, seeing them as nothing more than servants riding horses in the grasslands. Winds of war were gathering speed. One of the men wondered what the Northern Yuan was planning with all that bamboo, questioning if they were trying to cook rice in it instead of using pots. He speculated that it could be preparation for a siege, explaining that bamboo filled with charcoal and oil could easily burn down a guard post if set on fire. Chief Eunuch Wang Jun respectfully greeted the emperor, informing him that the preparations to sow chaos in the Northern Yuan, as desired by the emperor, had been completed. He added that he would come forward himself, and that all government officials of or above the rank of ministers were to participate. The man wondered if Joseon would come out to defend the Shenyang region, or if they were worried about his potential defeat. He declared that Joseon was doing this for their own survival, as it would be infinitely difficult to drive them out if they bypassed Shenyang and entered Joseon. He scoffed, believing such thoughts would vanish in the presence of his royal dignity. He wished he could summon King Yidu of Joseon to personally lead the army. He had a good idea. With the emperor's favor, the second son of Yidu had visited their country recently and gained much knowledge. He suggested that while the eldest son must inherit the throne, the second-born could participate in the war. Yi Qian apologized to the emperor, explaining that he might be a royalty from an uncivilized country, but it was still not logical to compel him to participate in another country's war. The emperor slammed his fist on the table, declaring that even if the will of heaven aligned with his, he determined what was logical. He ordered his servant to quickly write down his words, stating that Joseon had received Ming's letter of credence, and that Grand Prince Suyang, representing the uncivilized country, would participate in his campaign to witness his royal dignity. The emperor was sending him with such a ridiculous pretext. Yi Qian apologized to the emperor, stating that it was greatly out of line with etiquette, and that he was only concerned about whether there was a horse that could bear his weight. The emperor assured him that he wouldn't actually be on the battlefield, so he should stay quietly inside the military curtain, adding that he shouldn't worry too much, as he would devote himself to avoiding mistakes. The emperor gripped Yi Qian's hands tightly, telling him to make sure to come back alive. At Namhansan Fortress headquarters of the Military Training Command, the general was climbing the net. Suyang continued to climb the net, showing off his strength to the soldiers. He remarked on the excellent device, noting that it had everything ordinary soldiers could do. An official informed him that they were set to deploy in a week. The official admitted he couldn't believe that His Highness, the Grand Prince, would personally appear at the battlefront, adding that he would prefer to stay quietly behind the military curtain. Suyang told him that the battlefield was not as funny as he may think, and told him not to beat around the bush. Suddenly, a muscular man stepped forward, declaring that he wanted to cross swords with His Highness, the Grand Prince. Suyang looked visibly surprised at the sudden challenge. The crowd began to murmur. They noted that even if the general looked 50 years old, he was a remarkable general who had been chopping the thoroughly skillful barbarian chieftains. The crowd speculated that perhaps the general would go easy on him, because otherwise, how could they even exchange 10 blows? They said to His Highness the Grand Prince that the state of affairs was getting crazy. The muscular man stepped forward, acknowledging that in this crazy world, anything could happen. He declared that he would go at His Highness the Grand Prince with all his might and main. Suyang looked shocked and questioned why he would go at him with might and main. Suyang didn't wait for the general to make the first move. He charged forward, wooden training sword raised. The sound of wood on wood echoed as Suyang's training sword met the general's. The fight intensified as the two traded blows, either giving an inch. Suyang pressed his attack, bringing his sword down with overwhelming force. Suyang took a decisive step forward. He raised his wooden sword high above his head, preparing to strike. The wooden swords collided with a resounding crack. An observer marveled that the general was kind enough to match the level of His Highness, Grand Prince Suyang, wondering who else could handle such strength. Force of the collision sent the wooden sword flying out of his hands. The wooden sword landed with a thud at the feet of the assembled crowd. The man in the black robes looked on in utter disbelief. Martial arts prowess is the foundation. The man in the red robes admitted that he had been worried because Suyang had been devoted to conducting himself and preparing his body while neglecting the sword for so long. He declared that his concern had been unfounded. The man in black robes cautioned Suyang that even the most skilled commander could not single-handedly defeat an entire army. Therefore, he urged him to stay away from the battlefield as much as possible, explaining that even Yi Jingnoke wouldn't dare harm a member of the royal family, despite his immense strength. Suyang realized that the original owner of the body he now possessed must have been extraordinarily skilled in martial arts to react so quickly. The man in black robes insisted that Suyang was talented and vital to the country, far more so than himself, at almost 50 years old. The muscular man with the practiced sword apologized to the Grand Prince, explaining that if he were injured during their sparring match, it would be unlikely for him to be dragged into war. He added that he spared no effort and determination to land a breaking blow. Suyang smiled, realizing that the man might be made of sterner stuff than he originally thought. Meanwhile, on July 14th at Yanhaku, Ming's military base, General Wu Kuzhong had already died, and Datong had fallen. The man with the white beard asked what had happened, incredulous that they were attacked unarmed or if they had any infantry hand cannons. He then demanded to know the enemy's situation. The man in the red helmet explained that while the enemy's military forces were said to reach about 40,000, the actual number on the front lines was only half that. He suggested luring and striking the enemy, pointing out that they couldn't even match half their numbers. He added that those who fled from Datong were exhausted and demoralized and assured them not to worry. Just then, a shout rang out. The enemy was attacking. The soldiers were ordered to prepare spears and infantry hand cannons. However, one of the soldiers was confused, wondering if they had put gunpowder in the cannons. He suggested the other try first, and he would follow. Commanding officer bellowed at his troops, demanding that they get their cannons ready at once. The soldiers on horseback were ordered to shoot arrows, to force the enemy to fire their hand cannons. A hail of arrows rained down upon them. They shouted a warning to avoid the incoming fire. The order to fire the hand cannons was given. One soldier questioned if that was how much gunpowder they were supposed to use, but he was told there was no time to measure and to just fire. The soldier cried out in pain. He called out to Bayan. He wondered if the order to fire the grand cannons meant they were supposed to use these toys, asking if Bayan was okay. He realized it was a lead pellet that had gotten stuck in the leather armor and stopped. The soldiers noticed that their enemies were not stopping their dash, and they needed to act quickly. They shouted for gunpowder to be poured into the ignition hole, ready to pull the trigger. Suddenly, one of the soldiers looked at the hand cannon in his hands, confused. The hand cannon exploded, leaving the soldier injured. Another hand cannon went off as well. The order was given to withdraw the infantry hand cannoneers to the rear, as the casualties were already too high. The enemy was charging. The man with braided hair commanded his soldiers not to spare any sword, but to trample and kill their enemies. He demanded that they calm down, and questioned what the rear archers were doing. The man with braided hair pointed and declared that one of the enemy soldiers was the leader. The bearded man ordered his troops to capture him. The man in golden armor noted that the vanguard unit had arrived at Datong, but it had been over 2 weeks without a single messenger. He wondered if his dignity alone had compelled the enemy to retreat. He declared that there were signs that the enemy had temporarily stayed 20 li ahead and demanded why they hadn't met him at the drop of a hat, given they knew he was coming. One of the men began to speak, but before he could, the scene shifted to a sky filled with birds. 2 men stood atop poles, overlooking a landscape bathed in a fiery red glow. He declared that it was now on the horizon, but the person who had to become a governmental eunuch for just 1 silver niang was nowhere to be found. He commanded them to watch and behold the powerful figure standing on the battlefield. He acknowledged that the heavens may have made him the son of a poor man. He asked if he had not risen to the highest position among most men. He vowed that through this war, he would ascend to a spot higher than even the emperor. He declared that he would stand higher than the heavens themselves. The man with white hair, adorned in a black hat, rode alongside a soldier in full armor. He announced that he had something to ask the eunuch of the Ministry of Rights. The armored man, Duke of Yingjiangfu, questioned the eunuch about a previous statement. He recalled saying that 1 cannoneer could easily match 5 archers. The eunuch explained that out of 5 archers shooting arrows, only 1 shot would injure a person. However, if a hand cannon hit its target, it could pierce through armor right away, making it equivalent to 5 archers. The Duke of Yingjiang Fu questioned what kind of calculation that was. The man in the red robes, sporting a black hat, dismissed the previous topic. He declared that they should move to where the emperor resided. Suddenly, a soldier tied to a post urged His Majesty to retreat quickly. The ground was littered with corpses and soft horse droppings, indicating the Tatars had been there less than half a day ago. He questioned the order to retreat, especially for the royal family. He argued that Yu County was supposed to be the rear. He commanded everyone to retreat to the Jiuyong Pass to stop the enemy's invasion, then march again. Nevertheless, the already exhausted soldiers had no way to retreat quickly, and so began the military withdrawal slower than the long-distance march. The man with the beard scoffed at the laggards. He figured that if they spent 15 days getting there, it would probably take about that long to go back. According to the captives, they had 120,000 soldiers. If they intended to eliminate them all, it should be okay to kill 8,000 a day, right? He then suggested capturing the emperor and forcing him to open Beijing's gates for them, deciding that wasn't bad either. He commanded that the tribal chiefs be told to repeat nightly raids to exhaust those bastards. The man with braided hair ordered his soldiers to aim at the Ming bastards' hand cannons. Arrows rained down, striking their targets with deadly force. A Ming soldier was struck, the force of the arrow sending battle marks splattering. The Ming soldier shouted for his comrades to fire back with a volley of fire. A horse reared up, neighing loudly as the man struggled to control it. He calmed the horse, noting that it was becoming desensitized to the sound of explosions. He added that they had sent bamboo to the Khan as well, so their horses could respond in the same way. Suddenly, a voice boomed out, declaring that their boasted hand cannons posed no threat and demanded they throw down their weapons and flee. One of the attendants declared that he was done with the situation. The soldiers were all dead, and they were commanding the attendants to carry spears and swords, so he was going to seize the chance to escape rather than die there. Another voice agreed, saying that bringing those dirty creatures who were either men nor women was a bad sign. They reported that at Tuma Fortress, their army had been halved, and their losses were about 4,000 dead. They believed this was their last stand, so they were resisting fiercely. They planned to launch a full attack starting tomorrow, believing it must be over here. The man on horseback observed that many soldiers had been dying from hand cannons, likely because only the troops safeguarding the Ming emperor were left. He realized that this situation wouldn't last much longer either. Desperate, the man offered 100 silver niangs to whoever could bring him water. When someone questioned if money could conjure water from thin air, the noble snapped at him for speaking to him in such a manner. Suddenly, a soldier exclaimed that the enemies were fleeing from the path leading to the Jiuyong Pass, and he was certain that reinforcements had arrived. The man in the golden helmet insisted that he was still there and that the enemy's retreat was a trap, asserting that reinforcements couldn't have arrived so soon. Another man chimed in, claiming that it was clearly the palace guards pushing back the enemy and that the emperor should hasten to the Jiuyong Pass for safety. The man in the golden helmet interjected, telling him that he shouldn't go, as it was obviously a trap set by the Tatars, and demanded that he shut up. The man with long gray hair sneered, asking how a rotten scholar dared to speak about military matters and threatened to rip out his tongue if he spoke another word of nonsense. The man with the red beard agreed with the eunuch of the Ministry of Rights, urging everyone to retreat to the Jiuyong Pass without delay. Jiuyong Pass was only 10 more li away. The men were urged to push on. The soldiers spotted the enemy's detached corps. One of them warned that going any further would be dangerous. He screamed at the man on horseback to move ahead and shield the emperor from arrows, cursing Wang Jin for ruining everything. He was furious, lamenting that they could have held out for a few more days until the reinforcements from the Jiuyong Pass broke the encirclement. He called them a bunch of useless nuisances. The man threw several silver ingots to the ground, promising that it should be enough. He insisted that they safely escort him and the emperor to the Jiuyong Pass, and he would reward them handsomely. But then, a man with a beard cursed Fan Zhong, realizing that no amount of money could save his life. The man with silver hair, bloodied and battered, insisted that he had only followed the emperor's will, demanding that the man on the ground shut up, calling him castrated scum. With a clenched fist, a man brought forward what he called their beloved soup. He looked up to the heavens, begging the gods to consider his loyalty. The soap connected with its target, splattering battle marks across the room. The man on the left called the other a demon in a human body, remarking on how hideous his face looked without makeup. A man, covered in battle marks, demanded that someone take back what they had given him. He told them to cover the cost of traveling to the underworld, calling them a starving demon sucking the Ming's battle marks. The scene shifted to August 23, 1449, where Wang Jin, the eunuch of the Ministry of Rights of the Ming dynasty, died near the Tuma fortress. The flames of war were now heading towards Shenyang, where the Joseon army was stationed. The scene opened in Shenyang on August 24. A man in armor demanded an explanation, asking who had given that order. He explained that Beijing was in chaos, and the Vice Minister of War was hastily gathering forces and preparing defenses. The armored man revealed that the Emperor had sent an urgent message, stating that although they had broken the Tatars' momentum, many soldiers were injured and required regular ones from Liaodong. Suyang pressed the regional commander, sensing he was being deceived. He asked if the man was hiding something, reminding him that Joseon was a loyal vassal state. The commander laughed nervously, asking what he would have to hide. Suyang leaned in, his expression serious. He asked if there was some terrible event, the revelation of which would cause even the Liaodong soldiers to flee. He swore upon his status as a Grand Prince to keep it confidential if the commander spoke honestly. The armored soldier finally relented, revealing the devastating news. He reported that 200,000 soldiers, led by the Emperor himself, were trampled and shattered by Tatars. He added that all officials above the minister rank were massacred. The soldier grimly revealed that His Majesty had been captured by the enemy. The armored soldier explained that 100,000 soldiers from Central and South China were already advancing northward to defend Beijing, so they simply had to protect the city until they arrived. He warned that it would be a grave problem if the enemy shared the tactics that broke down the Emperor's army. The man with the helmet leaned forward, demanding to know if they could defend the Shenyang region or not. He reminded them that it would take about 10 days for the news to reach the Liaodong region. He added that if they couldn't drive the enemy out before then, even the friendly Jurchens would turn against them. The man with a mustache insisted that their ordinary soldiers must step up to sweep away the Tatars. He exclaimed that they were ferocious enemies who had crushed the Emperor's army, and asked if they were really going to wage a full-scale war against them. One of the men argued that staying in Shenyang would only ensure their survival, while the entire northern part fell into chaos. He pointed out that historically, during the Tuma crisis, the Liaodong army remained in place, and Joseon did not suffer direct damage, but Suyang wondered how things could have turned out worse than in history, especially since they had provided the Ming soldiers with hand cannons. The Liaodong regional commander, Gao Yi, seemed dissatisfied, and who could blame him? The extermination of a 200,000-strong army was incomprehensible. The sound of gunfire echoed. The man approached, asking to see the cannon. He identified it as a hand cannon, and then asked if the holder was a prince of Joseon. The man with the cannon confirmed that it was a hand cannon, and asked what the matter was. Suyang examined the hand cannon, noting the size, weight, and even the different muzzle. He wondered if there was usually such a difference in cannons, and why this one was so clean. He asked if they had even trained with it. He learned that it was their first time training with real gunpowder, and that they said it was too expensive. Suyang was shocked. Suyang realized that even the teaching of powder weapons concepts in the military training command didn't always prevent accidents from happening. He wondered if they really threw untrained soldiers into the war with these randomly produced hand cannons. Suyang, holding the hand cannon, stated that the Northern Yuan had not yet experienced their true power. Meanwhile, at Taisun Khan's camp northeast of Kaiyuan City in Liaodong, a man with a beard was informed that the Western Army had smashed the vanguard and was attacking Ming's main forces. He commented that Joseon was much weaker than Ming, so their 30,000 troops would be enough. He considered it was worth a try, then inquired about the talk of the Liaodong forces withdrawing, and that they were supposedly leaving only a minimal number of troops behind. The man with blonde hair and braids grinned, holding a scroll. He declared that his elder brother had undoubtedly achieved a sweeping victory, and that he was Izan Taisher's younger brother, Mao Nahai. At Taisun Khan's camp, a soldier burst into the tent, shouting that Joseon's troops were advancing north out of the city. The man with braided hair was shocked to hear that the Liaodong army had retreated and abandoned the city, leaving the fortress to head into the open field. He was asked what he thought of the situation. He grinned as he thought about the fine horse he had received from his clever brother, ready to run riot on the battlefield. The man with braided hair was confident that victory would be effortless. However, he didn't expect the Joseon troops to be camped on a hill. He observed that the Joseon soldiers were forming their lines with the sunlight taken into account, meaning those bastards had some battle experience. He recalled that it didn't take long for his elder brother to bring down even the Ming vanguard. He thought that after crushing the Ming, they'd be enemies again. The man with braided hair believed the Ming would be crushed, but he also knew that after that, they would be enemies again. He added that they had never fought together before, so it was better to divide their roles. He stated that he understood and asked the Khan to charge, promising that his soldiers would step forward and open fire. A bald man with a topknot prepared to fire an arrow. A soldier arrived, announcing that he had brought the bow and arrows for His Highness, the Grand Prince. Suyang thanked him. Suyang was asked if he could really shoot those arrows. He responded that it was just a matter of overflowing strength. He drew back the bow, aiming at the distant Ming army. The Ming soldiers raised their shields just in time, bracing for the attack. "Shield yourselves!" they shouted. The man with the beard, observing the shield wall, was impressed by their swift movements, but he thought it was nothing special. He declared they could advance without much worry. Suddenly, his eyes widened, and he stammered, wondering what he was seeing. An arrow pierced through the soldier's armor, causing him to cry out in pain as he collapsed from the devastating blow. Ming soldiers realized even their cannons couldn't deal significant damage, and they were in big trouble. The casualties among their soldiers were severe. With commanders ranking centurion or above dead, controlling even small squads was becoming increasingly difficult. They decided to pull back for now, fearing the entire formation could collapse. The Ming commander reasoned that since the Joseon soldiers shot arrows well, they must be good with cannons too. He ordered the troops to divide in half and prepare for unmounted archery. The Ming soldiers raised their bows and released their arrows, hoping to turn the tide. The Ming soldiers continued to fire their hand cannons, but the results were devastating for their own troops. The Joseon soldiers urged each other to hold the line, warning that any retreat would cause their entire army to crumble. Another soldier shouted for everyone to remain calm and continue fighting. The battlefield was shrouded in smoke, making it difficult for the Ming soldiers to aim accurately. The commander saw an opportunity and ordered his troops to strike now, then immediately commanded a full retreat. The Khan's iron riders were now moving forward, ready to engage the enemy. Commander declared that when Joseon fired twice, that would be the moment to charge straight into their lines. Suddenly, the sky rained fire arrows. One of the soldiers cried out, but the commander insisted that fire arrows just made a lot of noise. The fire arrows exploded on impact. The soldiers raised their shields for protection, but one of them cried out in pain, his arm burning. The soldier realized the fire arrows were filled with gunpowder. One of the soldiers declared that the enemy relied too much on cannons. He added that hand-to-hand combat was where they would break up the enemy's line, and ordered them to charge. The soldiers noticed that the enemy had switched to storm troops with long swords. They were ordered to step forward into formation. The soldiers were instructed that after volley firing, they should fall back to the rear trench on a signal. The soldiers stared at the approaching enemy, estimating that around 5,000 iron riders were charging towards them, divided into two groups, front and rear. One of the soldiers expressed his concern that their cavalry should be dealing with the incoming threat, as infantry would be trampled to death. Another soldier declared that he trusted in the Grand Prince, and there must be a reason for digging the trap, adding that if the Grand Prince lacked confidence in victory, he wouldn't have led their forces. As the enemy drew closer, the order was given to the cannoneers to volley fire. The armored soldiers spurred their horses onward, ignoring the fallen. The soldier yelled that they would tear the Joseon soldiers to shreds, but his expression suddenly turned to shock. The horses and riders began to sink into the muddy ground. Soldiers frantically commanded their troops to halt, realizing they were stuck in the mud and unable to advance on the Joseon forces. The Joseon forces unleashed a volley of cannon fire. The soldier on horseback was shocked, finding the situation impossible. He commanded his troops not to panic, reminding them that splitting into two groups was their plan for this situation. He ordered them to bring things like grain or hay bales, anything suitable to lay on the soil to cover the mud and maintain speed. The soldier glared, declaring that if they dared to play petty tricks, he would crush their skull with his horse's hooves. A soldier reported that the enemies were spreading hay and grain on the mud to cross. He warned that the cavalry in charge formation would reach them in a day. General ordered his men to send out their cavalry as well to strike the enemy's flanks. He also ordered them to prepare to fire within the position. The general roared, ordering everyone to get ready for hand-to-hand combat. The soldiers pressed on, their legs burning as they scaled the cliff face. The soldiers braced themselves, shields raised in anticipation of the coming impact. The enemy cavalry crashed into their lines, sending men flying with savage force. Despite the brutal assault, the general encouraged his troops, urging them to hold their ground. One of the soldiers yelled, accusing them of hiding behind their shields and using cannons. The mounted soldier roared, declaring that it was now their turn. The soldier winced in pain. The battle raged on with a ferocious intensity. The soldier gritted his teeth, determined to endure. Endure. We have to. One of the soldiers spoke with urgency, explaining that they had to endure until those bastards were lured in far enough. Meanwhile, another soldier prepared to strike with his spear. An arrow pierced through the officer's head. Someone desperately called out to the fallen officer, urging him to wake up. They anxiously asked how he was. Desperate soldier continued to try and rouse the officer, shouting his name and begging him to come around. A soldier groaned, struggling to stay conscious amidst the chaos of battle. He screamed in defiance as he charged forward, determined to avenge his fallen comrade. The sword gleamed ominously, ready to strike. With a fierce battle cry, the soldier lunged, his sword aimed at the enemy. The soldier urged Jung Byamsu to get up, insisting that there was no way he could have lost his senses. Jung Byamsu insisted that he hadn't lost his senses and had only been startled for a moment. He ordered them to quickly prepare for battle. The soldiers knew that they needed to kill the intruders to survive. The order to fire within the position could come at any time, so the soldiers were ordered to defend the fortifications and trenches with their lives and to not let the formation break. A soldier urged His Highness, Grand Prince Suyang, to stay back, warning him that he might get hit by a stray arrow. Soo-young asked how he could stay back when his soldiers were dying and demanded that they give him the arrows. Soo-young declared that he would personally make things hot for those bastards. One of the soldiers exclaimed that he was sick of those Joseon jerks, saying that they had gotten cocky just because a few shallow tricks had worked. He angrily ordered them to kill them all. A soldier cried out in disbelief, realizing that someone on the hill was throwing spears. One of the soldiers noticed that 3 cavalrymen were charging up the hill. He pointed out that the attire of the lead rider indicated that he was a high-ranking general, declaring that whoever took his head would achieve the greatest merit that day. Suddenly, the soldiers realized that what they thought was a spear was actually an arrow. Soo-young, riding toward them, drew his bow and aimed. One of the soldiers recognized him and shouted his name. The arrow struck true, and the soldier fell from his horse, impaled. The soldiers' faces were a mixture of fear and determination. One of the soldiers shouted that there was fire within their position. He urged everyone to take shelter in the trenches. The cannon was primed and ready to fire. The cannons roared to life, unleashing a devastating barrage. The order to fire echoed across the battlefield. The man in the helmet stared in disbelief. He stammered that this was impossible. The order to fire echoed, and the cannons roared to life again, unleashing another devastating barrage. The man in the helmet was struck by the cannon fire. The order to cease fire was given, and the soldiers began to reorganize their formation amidst the fallen. The soldiers announced that the remaining enemies would be dealt with by His Highness, the Grand Prince, and cautioned everyone to be careful. Amidst the chaos, one soldier remained, surveying the devastation. His face contorted with rage, he vowed to take at least one enemy with him. Soo-young drew his bow, his eyes fixed on the fleeing enemy. He told the man to go to hell. His face contorted with rage, he screamed that the enemy would be the one to die. Soo-young released the arrow, aiming for the fleeing figure. The arrow flew true, striking the enemy rider. He looked up in disbelief as the arrow closed in. The arrow found its mark, piercing the enemy rider's head. The soldier in red armor collapsed. Another soldier prepared to fire. The soldiers erupted in cheers, proclaiming that His Highness, Grand Prince Soo-young, had taken down the enemy commander. The man with the beard declared that the enemy commander was dead and that they just needed to clear out the remnants, cursing under his breath. The man with the beard in red armor pointed out that they were mixed in with the Joseon cavalry, so the cannons couldn't be fired at will. He ordered them to at least suppress the cavalry before they reorganized. One of the soldiers screamed, drawing his sword. The man with the beard realized the situation was dire and ordered a retreat. Another soldier on horseback warned that if they showed their backs to the Joseon army, the Jurchen barbarians would look down on them. The man with the beard in red armor yelled at his soldiers, calling them fools. He insisted that they needed to retreat before the infantry approached, asking what they thought would happen if they were hit by cannons while crossing the river. Seeing their enemies fleeing, a soldier lit the rocket arrows and prepared to fire. The rocket arrows exploded, sending soldiers flying through the air. The man with the beard yelled that the Joseon bastards were firing cannons again, saying they had all gone mad. He insisted that they needed to get out of there quickly, asking about the detached corps with Kungsan of the Jurchen tribe. One of the soldiers acknowledged that thanks to the Grand Prince's plan, they had minimized their losses. He added that it had been dangerous when the enemy commander survived and went after him, questioning if the commander's horse had gone crazy. Someone yelled at the Grand Prince to keep away from the charging horse. The horse neighed loudly. Soo-young braced for impact. Soo-young realized the horse was enraged by its owner's death, and it was much stronger than an average horse. The horse neighed loudly as it charged. Someone yelled, warning the Grand Prince. Horse's kick landed with a sickening thud. Soo-young staggered, but he refused to yield. He acknowledged that the horse was a tough brute, but he absolutely could not lose. He channeled all his energy, focusing on pumping his muscles to throw the beast off. Soo-young's grip tightened, his muscles bulging with the effort. With a mighty yell, Soo-young hurled the massive horse into the air. A soldier cried out that it was too dangerous for His Highness, but Soo-young was determined to see it through. Soo-young, on top of the horse, yelled at the animal, asking if it was going to keep puffing air. He reminded the horse that its owner was dead. He demanded that the horse surrender. Two soldiers watched the scene with disbelief, wondering if he was trying to break the horse's neck with his bare hands. Soo-young continued to berate the horse. He warned the animal to listen, or it would live its whole life in the stable like a stallion, just eating fodder. He then told the horse that he was a gelding and that most war horses had their balls removed. Soo-young's eyes welled up with tears as he declared how cruel it was. He gave the horse an ultimatum: die there or serve him. The horse seemed to respond to Soo-young's intensity. A soldier marveled that Soo-young had tamed the violent horse. Soo-young declared that from then on, its name was Sword Reef, asking if it understood. Soo-young apologized for carelessly laying his hands on the spoils. The screen displayed the results of the battle. The Northern Yuan army had started with 30,000 men, and now had about 20,000 dead. The Joseon army, on the other hand, had started with 28,000 men, with 1,400 dead, 700 seriously injured, and 4,000 lightly injured. It was an overwhelmingly decisive victory. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mom told me I should stop reading and doing these recaps and that it was a waste of time. But I know you guys are different. If you like these recaps, please subscribe and let's prove her wrong. As the battle neared its end, the Northern Yuan army began to retreat. The bald man on horseback declared they also had to decide their course, warning that ignoring the situation would cause the Northern Yuan or Joseon to turn on them after the war. He stated that now was the time to chase Tai-Sun Khan, asking for opinions and adding that if the detached corps couldn't behead him, they needed to step in. Another man began to speak, addressing him as Your Excellency. The man in the orange robe grinned, announcing that he had a good idea. He explained that according to history, Tai-Sun Khan was killed by Izan. Bearded man on horseback looked enraged. The smiling man wondered aloud, but what if? The man in the orange robe wondered if Tai-Sun Khan's end would come from someone else's hand. Meanwhile, soldiers raced through the forest on horseback. The man in the helmet asked if these were the only soldiers who got away, realizing that those who hadn't joined them by now were probably dead. He noticed that his horse was tired and losing speed. The soldiers explained that as soon as they retreated, the Jurchen scum turned into thieves and charged at them. The man in the golden helmet seethed, declaring that those Jin leftovers knew no honor, and that the Iron Riders were doomed to massacre, with Mayona High becoming a piece of meat. Something felt off to the man, wondering if Izan Taisher deliberately sent them false information, or perhaps those Joseon bastards just fought well. He decided that they were to quickly join forces with Izan and strike the Ming, and handling Joseon next wouldn't be too late. The Khan was informed that the Jurchen scum stole horses and fled, and he angrily asked if they were just saying that now. The man in the orange armor stated that Izan, not being of the Golden Horde, would not be recognized, and thus they had to use the Khan. Soldier in orange armor reported to the general. The soldier announced that the detached corps had driven Tai-Sun Khan into the forest, adding that they had finally made it. One of the soldiers suggested that His Highness the Grand Prince demonstrate his strength when capturing the Khan, but the other soldier seemed unsure. The man in the orange armor reported that the barbarians recognized Suyang, calling out the name of Grand King Taejo. They even recognized the bow he was using. Suyang dismissed the comparison, saying that he was just big and didn't match him in any way. The soldier insisted that His Highness was underestimating himself, and the important thing was that they saw him as a valiant general. Soldier imagined His Highness subduing Tai-Sun Khan in bare-handed combat. One of the soldiers declared that the rest would all surrender, making it easier to insist on favorable terms for their country. They would pay the way with all their strength. The soldier urged the Khan to find a way to survive, explaining that they weren't firing cannons in the forest, but as soon as they got out, they'd be covered with fire. The order was given to prepare for the final battle, but something was off. The Joseon bastards were acting strange. Khan demanded that the disgrace of the Golden Horde show themselves. He wanted to see the face of the one who dared to covet their country with such careless ambitions, claiming to be descendants of the mighty Yek Mangyal Ulus, yet acting so pitifully. One of the soldiers questioned how they dared to mouth off about the Yek Mangyal Ulus, calling them the dross of Goryeo. He urged the Khan to muster all their strength in charge, declaring that they must take that bastard's head. The man with black hair revealed that he was the descendant of Grand King Taejo, the one who shot dead the Northern Yuan commander Mayona High, and the second prince of Joseon, Grand Prince Suyang. The enemy soldiers demanded that Suyang show himself, giving him an hour to come out and fight like a man. Their voices echoed across the battlefield, taunting the Grand Prince. One of the men scoffed at Suyang's silence, wondering if he was even a man, or just someone who would quietly listen to the insults. Another soldier declared that they wouldn't even need weapons, suggesting they fight barehanded. One of the enemy soldiers declared that he enjoyed Book, and would like to try a modified version, because he was sick of the current situation where they had to fight and die. The man with braided hair demanded that the second prince of Joseon, Grand Prince Suyang, reveal himself. He then asked what Suyang would give them if they beat him. The man declared that if he was recognized as a true man and part of the Golden Horde, Suyang would return 1 horse per person. He added that Suyang would also ensure their safe escape to the Guangshuan Pass. The man with the helmet questioned if they could trust Suyang, since no true man of Joseon had ever been as spineless as him, so how could he lie? He demanded that Suyang come out himself, or they would obliterate every one of his men. One of the men wondered if Suyang would come out. Given the situation, he thought that keeping the troops intact and returning would be a success, and so he would accept. One of the men asked how Suyang had come up with that wrestling. Suyang explained that he had developed it with Mr. Ma as a pastime while inventing conducting oneself and preparing the body. The man with the helmet explained that Book or Syria ends when one is on the ground, so there's room for tricks, but this was purely a contest of strength. The soldiers watched from horseback. He smirked, finally seeing the face of the ringleader. Suyang stood ready. He revealed that he had been waiting. Suyang declared that he would end this war. The man lunged forward, ready to strike. He slammed his opponent to the ground, He questioned if that was what they called using strength. The man strained, his face contorted with effort. He let out a battle cry. With a mighty yell, the man with black hair prepared to unleash his devastating move. He announced that he was about to perform the storm throw. He slammed Tai-sun into the ground with incredible force. He demanded that Tai-sun get up and show him his strength, asking if he wanted to be dragged to Joseon like that. The Khan begged someone to fold that lump in half, groaning in pain. Soo-young declared that this was a choke slam. Khan grunted as he hit the ground hard. Soo-young demanded that the Khan get up, sneering as he asked if all his strength was just about collapsing. The Khan writhed in pain, struggling to breathe. Suddenly, a fist clenched tight, ready to strike. The Khan looked up at Soo-young, who was standing over him. He accused Soo-young of breaking the rules by daring to use his fists, calling him a petty coward. Soo-young's face contorted in rage. He declared that the Khan deserved to die. Soo-young declared that next was the giant swing, leaving the soldiers looking shocked and terrified. The Khan, battered and exhausted, could barely speak. He questioned if Soo-young was up for more struggle, thinking to himself what the hell this brat was. Soo-young stood over him, flexing his massive muscles. The Khan admitted defeat, and the Joseon soldiers cheered. Soo-young declared that his body had won, all thanks to the meticulous care bestowed upon him by his father, proving his filial piety once again. He then announced that he would now perform the Black Dragon's pose to celebrate the triumph. The soldiers exclaimed that from the front or the back, he truly was the Black Dragon himself, chanting Grand Prince Soo-young's name. The commander-in-chief reported that together with Kungsun, they had conquered the enemy remnants, to which he was told well done. Soo-young told the captive that they would let him go, as long as he accepted the agreement, and recited the Jiza agreement. Terms were laid out. First, he had to acknowledge Joseon's victory and pay a ransom of 5 horses per captive. Second, if future trade with Joseon was established, he had to actively embrace it. Third, he had to send a letter about any attempts to invade Joseon by force. Fourth, at the next 2 Yek Kurilta, he was to treat Joseon representatives on par with Goryeo King Sim. However, the representative didn't need to be of royal battle marks, and could be a civil servant of the first junior rank or higher. Soo-young questioned if they were insane and asked if they didn't like the terms. The captive man admitted that the first and second terms were fine, since they had lost the battle. However, he questioned being treated on par with King Sim at the Yek Kurilta. The captive man pointed out that King Sim was a Goryeo man with a proper title. He asked if Soo-young hadn't once called Joseon, the successor of Goryeo and their brother nation, and suggested they treat the Joseon representative like a Kamek chieftain. The captive man asked if Soo-young expected him to approve of the next Khan election while he was still breathing, and revealed that Soo-young had no idea what was happening in Beijing right now. The captive man wondered why Izan would kill the Ming emperor, and stated that if he didn't, he could never have his eye on his place. The scene shifted to a burning city. He continued, explaining that Izan had defeated the Ming's 200,000-strong great army, taken the emperor hostage, and was breaking through the passes, attacking Beijing. The captive man was told that had he not been taken captive, he would have likely heard the news around that time that day. He looked shocked and muttered Izan's name in disbelief. The first man stated that if the battle had started just 3 days later, the Jurchens would all be on his side. The second man looked surprised as he heard that Izan's failure was also inevitable. The man in armor stated that he gave Ming too much time and by now, they'd probably been reinforced with hundreds of thousands from the Nanjing region. He wondered why he would propose these terms, then asked if he had thrown and slammed the captive man so much that his brain had stopped working. The captive man, tied up and helpless, was told that right now, Izan must be wishing for his death. The man with the beard decided to add one more clause, stating that he could send troops to assist him in dealing with the Oirat at any time. The other man agreed to add it. The captive man asked when he was going to release him. The man with black hair, Grand Prince Soo-young, replied that it would be after 15 days. The captive man was shocked and said that they needed to find a way to counter Izan right now. The man with black hair declared that the situation was up to them, questioning why the captive was complaining when they were sparing his life and backing his country. The captive man, tied up and visibly frustrated, shouted that the other man was a bastard, stating that news of Tyson's death must reach Izan by September 14th. The man with black hair looked towards the sky, wondering what would happen if Tyson, presumed dead, returned on September 30th. He reasoned that Izan would think he had negotiated with Joseon, and regardless of his Golden Horde bloodline, Izan wouldn't let that slide. The man with black hair stated that things may seem calm for now, but that wouldn't last. The date was September 17th, 1449. On the battlefield, a man with a shaved head and goatee yelled that everyone was too exhausted. The scale of the battle was immense, with the ground littered with the fallen. Despite the staggering losses inflicted upon the Ming forces, their ranks seemed endless, their soldiers constantly being replenished. The man in the battered armor declared that they would never breach the Forbidden City. Nearby, a warrior reported that Taisher was reporting in. Messenger announced that 100,000 more troops had arrived from the south. The man with long hair exclaimed that they had brought more men than arrows, confirming what they had heard at the Zijing Pass. The man with the winged helmet declared that they had 80 million subjects against their scant 100,000, with 1 in 5 men being a soldier. He asked if they were ready to face an 8 million strong army. The man with black hair grimaced, realizing that they were replenishing faster than they could kill them. A message arrived from the Khoi tribe, stating that they would withdraw because of heavy losses, which caused the man to exclaim in disbelief. The man with black hair and a goatee remarked that those bastards were getting more skilled at handling cannons, to a level they couldn't ignore. The man with long brown hair and a goatee declared that even using the emperor as their last resort was proving useless. The soldier looked up, confused, and asked about the emperor. The man with the goatee clarified that he was referring to Yingzong Emperor's younger brother, Jingtai Emperor. The man with black hair and a goatee realized that they had already enthroned a new emperor, solving the problem with a major replacement. The man with the shaved head heard troubling rumors going around and asked what they were. The man with the beard and long hair declared that the Joseon army, victorious in the Liaodong region, was said to have finally killed the Khan, and with this momentum, they were going to march on Karakoram, the capital of the Mongol Empire. One of the men grabbed the other's shoulder and urged him to avenge the Khan and defend the Karakoram first. He argued that if they declared revenge for the Khan, all the tribes would unite, and not even Ming could withstand an invasion by an army of 300,000. At the Ming capital, one of the soldiers rushed to report to the chief eunuch with urgent news. He added that although the soldiers had taken quite a toll, they could still support the 20,000 regular ones left in Liaodong. The man in the red helmet then asked if the Joseon commander was the first junior rank official, Kim Jong-seo, and the other confirmed that he was. The man in the red helmet informed him that the enemy was preparing to retreat. Joseon had truly achieved something great. It was November 4, 1449, in Hanyang, and the streets were packed. The people marveled at the cavalry's horses, noting that some of them were the fine steeds the enemy had ridden. One man wondered if they had captured over 10,000 of them. Back in the palace, the king smiled serenely as he heard that his people had prayed day and night for his safety. The king announced that Central Flank Commander Kim Hyo-sung would be promoted to the first junior rank Right Minister. Right Flank Commander Yi Jing-ok would keep his current position, as his merits and faults balanced out. Tai-sun Khan was officially missed. Yi Jing-ok, who took the blame, was a truly loyal man. For subduing the enemy leader and gaining the Jurchen's cooperation in the area, the king declared he would grant Grand Prince Suyang 1,000 jewels Sikyup. Suyang responded that his royal grace knew no bounds, and that he owed everything to the body bestowed upon him by His Majesty the King. The king replied that he did great. King Sejong, in high spirits, exclaimed, "My boy." Meanwhile, the crown prince was pushing himself to the limit in the training yard. The trainer watched him with concern, telling the crown prince that he seemed to be pushing himself too much, and to please take it easy. The crown prince strained against the weight, saying that since his younger brother had subdued the enemy king, they would now pay attention to the king's body. The crown prince continued pushing himself, lifting weights that were more than most military officers could handle. He wondered if he should be lifting 1,000 gun by now, and how long it had been since he lifted 900. The trainer told His Highness the Crown Prince that he was more than enough, and there was no need to comfort him. The Crown Prince strained to say that he would assist him. The man in red armor stood amidst a field of red. He looked around, disoriented. He wondered where he was. Suddenly, a brutal attack slammed into him. He found himself surrounded by bodies, the scene painted in crimson. The man in red armor looked at his hand, unsure of what was happening. He wondered what was going on, as he muttered, "What is this?" Suddenly, he was face to face with a battered man, his face covered in battle marks. The brutal man grabbed the wrist of the man in red armor, declaring that he should feel his pain. The man in red armor's eyes widened, a bead of sweat running down his face. Amidst the chaotic backdrop, someone cried out for their lord, asking if he was all right. Two individuals looked at each other with concern etched on their faces. Suyang, still catching his breath, muttered, "My lady." Suyang admitted that it was no wonder he was feeling shaken, after witnessing such brutal scenes of people being torn apart, and heads exploding from his arrows. The woman in attendance suggested that the medicine wasn't working well, and perhaps they should build a new house. She added that frequent consumption of medicine could harm the body. Since it appeared to be a mental illness, she suggested offering prayers might help. Someone asked Suyang if he had coughed. At any rate, there was an order for him to return to the palace immediately. Suyang asked if his father had called for him, announcing his arrival. The man explained that through this winter mission, they planned to send a letter of advice to the new emperor of Ming. He wanted to know what the other man thought about it. The king of Joseon had concerns about matters at the border. Due to the chaos caused by the Dags, both countries had suffered greatly. He explained that the influence of the Ming Empire was easily seen by the Tatar, Uryankai, and the Jurchen. He requested that the Ming firmly establish their position in the Liaodong area and drive out the Dags. He suggested that if they stationed 100,000 regular soldiers in Liaodong at all times, they wouldn't dare to invade Liaodong. Joseon pledged to eradicate the Dags to uphold the great achievements of Ming. Suyang approached his father, the king, and announced that he had something to inform him. He explained that while it seemed they were bowing to Ming, there was a hidden meaning. He summarized that the losses in Liaodong were due to a lack of population, so the intent was to increase military strength by relocating people to Liaodong. Suyang added that if 2 million people were forcibly relocated to Liaodong, it would only be a loss for Ming. Liaodong was a barren land overrun by the Dags. The best they could do in Liaodong was raise millet and horses. Ming would have to continue to expend resources to feed them. The man in the red and gold robes agreed with Suyang's assessment. If 1 million people migrated, they would have to provide at least 4 million suk of grain annually. He pointed out that 4 million suk was an enormous amount, equivalent to Joseon's entire annual budget. Furthermore, stationing such a large force in Liaodong was like aiming a knife at the throat of the Northern Yuan, who would constantly launch invasions. Suyang concluded that Ming could not gain anything from Liaodong, and if they suffered such losses, they would certainly try to shift the burden onto Joseon. The man in the red and gold robes agreed with Suyang's assessment, and insisted that if Ming exerted effort, Joseon would also have to do the same. He stated that Yu's words made sense, and that he understood his opinion. The man in the red and gold robes paused, then revealed he had something to tell them in advance. He looked down, admitting that now that he was over 50, he was old and weary and could no longer govern the country. He declared that on March 30th of the following year, he would pass the throne to the crown prince. The man in the red and gold robes acknowledged that Suyang's help had been significant. Suyang responded that he had only fulfilled his filial duty, and revealed that he had a favor to ask of him. He requested that for a year, Buddhist services be held in the temples of all 8 provinces, deep in the mountains and valleys, for the fallen soldiers. Suyang emphasized that this was a very important matter and suggested that his uncle, Grand Prince Hyeryong, who was deeply pious, should accompany him. The man in the red and gold robes acknowledged that Suyang's help had been significant, and Suyang responded that he had only fulfilled his filial duty. He revealed that he also had a favor to ask of him, hoping it would help calm his restless mind after the battlefield. The men expressed that they were deeply grateful to His Majesty. The palace stood tall and imposing. The man on the golden throne considered the situation. Joseon was now demanding to be paid for their fighting. The man in the red robes wondered if they were asking for help because they couldn't handle becoming enemies with the Northern Yuan. He thought King Yidu of Joseon must think this was an inevitable proposal. The man on the throne sighed, thinking about sending people to station 100,000 regular soldiers in Liaodong. He considered sending 1 million, no 2 million people, but knew that would incur significant losses. The cost of the relocation was an issue. He knew they would have to extend the Great Wall to where the people were relocating in Liaodong, and their national treasury was already running low due to the war. He asked them all for their input. The man on the golden throne considered the situation in Liaodong. He wondered if Joseon could handle the Jurchen, who survived by plundering. He knew that the late King Yi Songhai had handled them well, but now they continued to fight. He realized that their intention was to solidify Liaodong and shift all the responsibilities, giving King Yidu of Joseon all the land 80 ri east of Tiling. The kneeling man in red robes looked up, shocked by the proposal. "Your Majesty," he exclaimed. The man on the throne explained that upon dealing with numerous northern tribes, including the Jurchen, they would eventually be exhausted. The man on the golden throne ordered that a reply be prepared to send to Joseon. Thus, a new wind began to blow again. On March 1, 1450, a grand ceremony was held. The 4th king of the Joseon dynasty, Munjong, ascended to the throne. While everyone was celebrating, there was one person who wasn't happy. The elderly man, Huang Hui, was barely able to stand. He lamented that despite the change of kings, he, at the age of 80, was still not allowed to resign. He wondered if he should ask the retired king once again for permission. Next day, Huang Hui requested retirement from King Sejong, who had become the retired king, but his request was denied once again. Deep in the forest, a man wearing a traditional hat seemed to be observing something. The man muttered that the king was using him as a counterweight, and that he had a wicked heart. Suyang asked if it wasn't good to make the body strong, which caused the other man to call him an insolent brat. He retorted that if he kept getting stronger, he'd claim he could deflect blades with his abs, which Suyang thought was a bit excessive. The man in the traditional hat claimed there was something similar to deflecting blades with abs. He explained that some people train their abs by hitting their bellies with a rolling pin. The scene shifted. The other man retorted that saying something like hitting with a rolling pin out of nowhere made it seem like his mental illness was cured. He recalled spending enjoyable times visiting famous temples with Grand Prince Hyeryong. Suyang revealed that he had donated new millstones to the temples. Since temples made a lot of tofu, they used millstones quite a bit. He had used the old millstones to make dumbbells, which turned out quite decent, and since these were light, high repetitions were the answer. He continued, if the Buddha statues looked too clumsy, Grand Prince Hyryang would ask you what he thought of the Buddha statue. Soo-young was furious, noticing a crack in the Buddha statue. He couldn't stand it any longer and demanded that someone be called to make a new one. He declared that they would call someone to make a luxurious Buddha statue, and he would be the model for the 4 Heavenly Kings statue, no exceptions. He thought to himself that it was very good. Soo-young was pleased that the 4 Heavenly Kings statue should be like this. Feeling at ease, he noted that it wasn't just a 4 Heavenly Kings statue, but a muscular, imposing 4 Heavenly Kings statue. Time passed, and it was soon the month of April. Soo-young received a letter stating that his older brother was sick, which surprised Josian. He pointed out that Soo-young's older brother was also his great-uncle, and he couldn't understand how such a healthy person could become ill. The man looked grave. He explained that the older brother had damaged his 2 front teeth, which had deeply saddened him. Since then, he had only been drinking, causing his health to deteriorate. Josian agreed that teeth were one of the 5 senses, so it was understandable that he was deeply saddened. He added that he was nearing 60 and feared what would happen if his teeth were to go bad, then declared he could read faces quite well. They set off at a run. The man in black and red robes questioned why Soo-young was doing this when there was perfectly fine advice to follow, pointing out that he had only taught Grand Prince Hyryang simple exercises and bodyweight training. Later, the man on the left declared that the talk of face reading had made him curious to see his own fortune and asked if Soo-young knew someone who could do it. He suggested they go to Gangnungsa Temple instead of Woljongsa Temple, as he knew a very skilled person. The man in the straw hat had learned from Hamhyo and Monk Jacho. The man in the black hat asked how it went with the fortune teller, wondering if he was as skilled as rumored. The man in the lilac robe was excited, declaring that the rumors were true. He insisted that the man in the black hat should go see him as well, as he was incredibly skilled. He added that this was the first time he'd seen Grand Prince Hyryang so excited. Someone peeked through a wooden door and asked if anyone was there. A man in a brown robe sat in front of a golden statue. He said it was truly an honor to have such a distinguished guest, but he wasn't supposed to come at this time. Soo-young wondered if it would have been better if he had come about 15 years later, because by then, the fortune teller wouldn't have the luxury to see fortunes. He continued, saying that in actual history, Sejong Soo-young visited Mount Odi around 1465, about 15 years later. At that time, he was already suffering from leprosy or a severe skin disease, and he wondered if the man knew something. Soo-young remarked that the fortune teller took jest as a jest, which was a talent in itself. He mentioned that the fortune teller had seen his uncle's fortune, and asked if he could read his now. The fortune teller responded that he wasn't sure if he should say. Soo-young urged him to continue, saying that fortune reading was connected to one's life. The fortune teller revealed that Soo-young would become king. The fortune teller continued, ominously stating that Soo-young would bring battle marks upon his nephew and friends. Soo-young, visibly angered, demanded to know what he had just said. The fortune teller added that having a guest might change everything, leaving Soo-young to wonder if he was saying that he was possessed by a ghost. The fortune teller stated that destiny wasn't something that could be easily altered. Soo-young stood defiantly amidst the chaos, the flames reflecting in his determined eyes. The fortune teller ominously warned that no matter how much a guest tried to guide fate down a different path, it would be difficult to avoid a bloodbath. Soo-young repeated the fortune teller's words, asking if he was saying there would be a bloodbath. The fortune teller confirmed it with a simple yes. Soo-young stared intently at the fortune teller and asked if he could handle it. Soo-young resolved that he must handle the coming challenges. He thought about how he had changed many things with his own 2 hands. He declared that he would face whatever came next and change those things as well, wouldn't he? Fortune teller seemed to relax, remarking that there was no need to worry with the power of such a distinguished person. The man in the red and gold robes stared intensely. Soo-young knew that he must do everything in his power to change the future. He thought of all the things he had changed with his own 2 hands. He knew that he would surely create a new future, different from before. He clenched his fist, ready to face whatever came next. Soo-young walked down the path, his physique dwarfing the men in front of him. One of them asked if he came from the north. The man's eyes widened, recognizing him. He realized that this person was Grand Prince Soo-young. The bald man kneeled before Soo-young, stating that it was an honor to meet him, and asking what would become of him if he kneeled here. The man thought that Soo-young was like a divine general, a warrior of the heavens. Soo-young stood in the courtyard, the elderly man beside him looking up in awe. The bald man commented on Soo-young's remarkable physique, then asked if he was one of the disciples. He clarified that those who had properly learned the immortal body training exceeded 2,000, and that there were also so-called Taoists, but they wouldn't call them disciples. The man clasped his hands together, thinking that if he could learn under someone like Soo-young, and if those individuals passed on their teachings to others, he imagined that soon, all Koreans would begin to grow stronger. The bald man looked up at Soo-young, declaring that in the north, strength was the only answer. He added that even if it was too late for him, his son must not have any regrets. He asked Suyang if he would consider taking his son as a disciple, offering to make his sacred preparation that autumn and report to His Majesty, who he was sure would approve. The bald man was overjoyed at the prospect of his son becoming a disciple of the king's brother, thanking Suyang profusely. Suyang thought to himself that the chief might not be worth teaching, but his children certainly were. He revealed that he had already discussed this matter with his elder brother. He wondered if they would be able to understand the martial body training, since they didn't even know how to read or study Confucian classics. Suyang reasoned that even if they didn't teach the Juchin chief, if they took in his children and taught them, their tribe's successor would, in essence, become one of their own. Suyang explained that he wouldn't let the opportunity slide, not after a 10-year-old spent 7 years learning Hangul, classical Chinese, and the 4 books and 5 classics, followed by years mastering the martial body training. He intended to encourage them to take the imperial exam. He added that his elder brothers would create a foreigner's imperial exam specifically for the barbarians, so they could have the body of a Jurchen, but the mind of a Korean. The bald man asked if he could ask something, mentioning the rumor that Suyang had defeated the Tai Sun Khan in the north. Suyang confirmed that he had crushed him. Suyang vividly described how he threw him over his shoulder and smashed him down. Then he grabbed his neck and slammed him into the ground again. He finished by saying that he grabbed his leg and hurled him. The bald man with the goatee asked if he could try something for once. Suddenly, a voice cried out, telling him to wait. Suyang vividly demonstrated how he would lift him up before slamming him down so hard that his back would surely break. He continued, saying he would grab his neck and slam him onto the ground, but the bald man quickly apologized, saying that he believed him. Suyang stated that the Jurchen revered strength, so Nazarin was perfect. He added that he would return and prepare to pay tribute that winter, telling them to travel safely. After that, the frontier chiefs of Liaodong came seeking him, but their suspicion crumbled before his muscles. He demonstrated his power by tearing apart armor with his bare hands. The men watching were astonished. They exclaimed that they, too, would pay tribute and asked him to take good care of their sons. Suyang called for Hukwu, saying he needed to train his waist. He declared that training with his body with such a colossal warhorse was a must. The Jurchen people revered strength, and Suyang had it in spades. They exclaimed that they, too, would pay tribute, even asking him to take good care of their sons, promising that even their sons could achieve half of what he had. Thus, over 30,000 Jurchen people came to pay tribute to Joseon. Back in the palace, King Munjang was impressed by Suyang's physique. He told him that seeing his robust physique put him at ease, asking if his sacred preparation went well. Suyang responded that he had faithfully carried out His Majesty's orders. However, he had closely reviewed the records of the battles fought in their northern borders and realized there were still many deficiencies in their army. Suyang humbly advised His Majesty not to interfere with matters regarding the northern border and the tributary troops. King Munjang responded that he knew, stating that they fought exceptionally well, so he had no intention of intervening. Suyang stated that the problem was the musketeers, questioning if any of the non-military officers knew how to use them, adding that firearms were meant for soldiers. An official vehemently disagreed. The officials explained that muskets were to be used alongside cannons, but no one knew how to do that. They pointed out the 7 steps required just to prepare them for use, asking if he could teach them easily. Suyang declared that they would separate the musketeers into a new unit, the Bureau of Firearms, stating that he had a good feeling about this. Suyang asked how many members the Bureau of Firearms would have, thinking about 500. He saw the potential, as the firearms enthusiast, King Munjang, was awakening. King Munjang humbly suggested setting a larger goal. He explained that with the compensation received from Ming in the national treasury, expanding from 500 to 1,000 might be reasonable. The king agreed that it was right to increase it. He added that the stallions promised by the driven had also adapted, so the number of military horses would surely increase. The official then asked if his total for the 3 lifts was really 850 gun, pointing out that just 2 years ago it was 700 gun. Suyang was pleased to hear that listening to him had inspired the king to change his diet and work harder. He told him that he may simply call him Hyung instead of addressing him formally, although he knew that wouldn't be proper etiquette. King Munjang countered that if Suyang wished to be called Your Majesty, he would first need to lift 1350 gun, or even 1500, and then he could do so. He pointed out that the sum of his 3 minor lifts was 1350 gun. The king laughed, calling Suyang a monstrous younger brother. But with so many Jurchen people coming, he wondered if they would have enough teachers. Among those fit to teach the Jurchen heirs, King Munjang recommended someone from Gangseo Heian. He described him as a man of deep knowledge, with no greed and no official posts. In Gangseo Heian, a messenger stood before a man with a long white beard, sitting at his desk. He told the man, who he addressed as teacher, that His Majesty had issued an edict, He urged him to read it, even if he was reluctant. The messenger's arrival was about to bring change, but elsewhere, children exclaimed in wonder. A muscular man carried them effortlessly on a bamboo pole. He told them that once they were done washing up, he would play a high-throwing game with them. The woman told everyone to settle down, noting that their hair was in a Q hairstyle, and asking if they could wear a braid. She exclaimed in delight, saying their faces were glowing. The children were eager to play throwing games, calling out to the muscular man. He reminded them that they needed to put on clothes first, and not to cry if they got scared. He prepared to launch one of the children skyward. With a mighty heave, he sent the child soaring through the air. The men held the sheet taut as the child began to fall back to earth. Soo-young laughed as he sent the child skyward. He declared that this was how he would crush someone like Tai Sun Khan. One of the men wondered if Soo-young was even human. He realized that with this method, he could serve both his father and mother at the same time, doubling his filial piety. A young boy looked up at Soo-young, wondering when he would ever become like him. Soo-young told them that they would begin their training at 16, once their bones were fully set, and until then, they should listen carefully to their instructors. The students agreed. One of the men wondered what he was eating, complaining that it was bland and dense. Soo-young told him to eat a lot of the meat, as it was essential to building a frail body like his. He then ordered them to go on a simple 10-li run. Soo-young looked up, startled by the sudden commotion. He was disappointed that he had just gotten into his reading. An older man watched the Jurchen children, impressed by their skill. He exclaimed, "Oh my! This Jurchen kid is quite skilled." He wondered if this method could really improve learning. Uniform was thrust forward. He was instructed to put it on and follow, as they would test him on what he had learned that day. The man in blue robes looked nervous. He protested that they had only studied for one Jurchen twice that day, wondering how he was supposed to memorize all of it. He was warned that if he made mistakes, it would affect his progress in martial body training. He questioned what that even meant, and was told that martial body training started with 3-part training: chest, abs, and triceps, then back and biceps. He was informed that since it was his first time, he would lift 40 gun for 3 sets, focusing on shoulders and lower body. He was told that was if he didn't make any mistakes. What? The men continued to walk, leaving him behind. One of the men read aloud, stating that Zilla asked about governing, and Confucius said that he would definitely correct his name, calling a gentleman someone who, wait. The man realized that they had memorized all of that. The more shocking thing was that he remembered it too. The man called out to the king. Huang Hui, now nearing 90 years old, begged for pardon for his grave sin against the former king. King Munjang told him to stand up, saying he was worried about his health. Huang Hui explained that when the king was still the crown prince, he had presented his illegitimate son, Huang Jin-ho, to the palace and asked if he recalled. The king responded that it had been 11 years ago. The gold that King Yidu received from the man on the golden throne was being moved. The man in red robes towered over Huang Zhengxing, calling him a sinner. He demanded to know where the rest of the gold had gone. Huang Zhengxing appeared utterly shocked.